Sanae Takaichi has stepped into the role of Japan's Prime Minister, and in doing so has carved out a defining chapter in the nation's modern political story that few anticipated. Barely more than 100 days after assuming leadership, her Liberal Democratic Party made an audacious call by dissolving the lower house of Parliament and launching snap elections at a pace that shattered previous records. The entire campaign unfolded over a mere 16 days, the shortest anyone can remember, turning what many viewed as a risky gamble into an unprecedented triumph. The results spoke for themselves. The LDP achieved its strongest showing ever, with Takaichi personally securing 316 seats out of 465, a staggering gain of 118 compared to the prior contest. Her coalition partners added another 36 seats, yet the real headline remains her solo accomplishment of claiming well over 2/3 of the chamber, an absolute supermajority never before attained in this way. She swept every single one of Tokyo's 30 districts in a clean victory that left rivals reeling. Opposition groups managed only respectable gains in spots like Nagoya and Osaka, and even in Osaka, the standout winner belonged to Takaichi's own coalition side. Put simply, the full opposition alliance ended up with fewer total seats than the main opposition party alone had claimed in the last election cycle. This time they had banded together under a fresh coalition that briefly edged ahead of the LDP in raw votes, but that edge now belongs firmly to the past. If those figures still leave room for doubt about the depth of her success, note that the party even had to surrender 13 seats to other groups purely because its proportional share outstripped the number of eligible candidates it could put forward. All of this unfolded just months after the LDP endured its second worst electoral performance in history back in October of 2024. Bear in mind, this is hardly some inexperienced newcomer to the scene. The party has steered Japan for 66 of its 71 years in existence, and yet within less than 18 months, it has risen from the brink of disaster through a ferocious resurgence that deserves to be called nothing short of historic. One can almost picture leaders elsewhere, like Emmanuel Macron, watching with frustration as his Japanese counterpart executed a high-stakes maneuver that had backfired so badly for him. What, then, do these remarkable elections truly mean for Japan moving forward? For starters, Sanae Takaichi now stands ready to govern with remarkably few constraints. Armed with a supermajority exceeding 2/3, the LDP can largely navigate around upper house oversight, save for one vital limitation that will prove decisive down the line. And make no mistake, Takaichi is no conventional figure. This Iron Lady of Japan brings an ambitious blueprint for the land of the rising sun that could reshape the country for decades. She has openly pushed to lift defense spending above 2% of GDP and declared without hesitation that Japan would stand with Taiwan if China ever moved to invade. She strongly backs expanded nuclear power generation and has quietly signaled it may be time to revisit the nation's firm policy against developing nuclear weapons. Beyond these bold steps, the Liberal Democratic Party appears closer than at any point since 1947 to achieving what even Shinzo Abe could not: amending the Constitution, above all Article 9, which renounces war as a sovereign right of the state. As most observers know, Japan relies on self-defense forces rather than a conventional military, and those forces face legal hurdles that might prevent them from aiding allies like Taiwan in a crisis. Constitutional revision would sweep away those restrictions, sending ripples of concern through Beijing while offering clear satisfaction to allies such as Donald Trump, with whom the Prime Minister currently enjoys warm ties. Still, it is wise not to race too far ahead of events. The reality today is that Takaichi commands enviable public support, likely ranking as the highest-rated democratically elected leader anywhere, with approval ratings soaring past 75%. Even so, changing the constitution remains an uphill battle. In her short time at the helm, she has already weathered a few turbulent market episodes tied directly to her economic proposals. This naturally raises pointed questions. How exactly did the LDP vault from its near-historic low to its greatest victory ever? In what direction will Takaichi guide the nation? And will a genuine constitutional overhaul actually materialize? On Critical Hour Report, we delve into these pressing issues with clear-eyed analysis to help you grasp the full picture of this pivotal shift. We must begin by underscoring one essential truth. For all the impressive numbers, these elections represent a personal triumph for Sanae Takaichi, far more than a collective win for her party. She alone initiated the parliamentary dissolution called the early vote and transformed the contest into a direct referendum on her own leadership, a test she passed with flying colours. Consider the numbers. After she won the internal party primary and took charge, cabinet approval jumped dramatically from around 40% to 75%. Yet the LDP's broader popularity barely budged, hovering below 40%. It seems ordinary Japanese citizens have not yet forgiven the party for its troubled stewardship of the economy in the years following the pandemic. Remarkably, none of those lingering resentments appear to touch the current Prime Minister. Another striking poll finding drives the point home. Among voters aged 19 to 29, her support exceeds 90%. Yes, you read that correctly, 90%. Such figures would make many single-party regimes envious. And remember, we are talking about a 64-year-old Conservative leader who openly cites Margaret Thatcher as her inspiration and takes firm traditional stances, including opposition to legal recognition of same-sex marriage. This is hardly the profile one expects to ignite enthusiasm among young people, especially at the head of a party that has dominated governance for most of the democratic period. By comparison, in countries like Spain, newer anti-establishment voices attract youth, but here the long-established LDP under Takaichi has achieved something rarer. Even Japan's own counterpart to those fringe movements, Sanseito, managed only 15 seats out of 465, a modest increase of 13 that still leaves it largely sidelined despite international headlines. So how has this candidate managed to dominate among younger voters? A few telling moments help illuminate the picture, such as the Prime Minister enthusiastically joining a K-pop drumming session alongside the South Korean president. It is an underreported episode, yet it reveals how her style of engagement stands apart from the buttoned-up norms of her party, cutting across age and ideology in unexpected ways. Politics in Japan has traditionally operated through carefully scripted mainstream channels, where every statement is weighed and every adjective chosen with precision to avoid controversy. Within the LDP especially, positions are often hinted at rather than declared outright. Takaichi breaks that mold completely. She thrives on social media and refuses to soften her language, openly embracing the most ambitious and potentially divisive reforms and policies. Paradoxically, part of her magnetic appeal comes from articulating ideas that others only dare contemplate privately, fearing they might cost votes. Yet her greatest strategic insight lies elsewhere. She has masterfully claimed credit for everything positive associated with the LDP while letting the party shoulder responsibility for its failures. Let us be clear on this. Takaichi is no outsider parachuting in from nowhere. She served as a minister under Shinzo Abe and occupied senior roles throughout the difficult post-pandemic years, and making her a well-known quantity in Japanese public life. Abe himself endorsed her candidacy in the party primaries shortly before his assassination, even though she placed third in that earlier race. A key factor in her ability to rise above past scandals involves the major corruption controversy linked to the Abe era, involving illicit cash envelopes totaling hundreds of millions of yen and implicating multiple ministers and dozens of lawmakers. Most of those implicated came from Abe's specific faction, which are sharply delineated within the party's structure. Remarkably, none of this baggage has stuck to Takaichi. As Abe's political heir, she has achieved the near impossible feat of redirecting blame toward the broader organization, even factions unconnected to the affair. Why has this worked? Despite her long presence at the highest levels, many citizens still view her as somehow separate from the old guard establishment, a perception that carries real weight. Japanese politics often carries a dynastic flavor, with nearly 30% of current lawmakers tracing family ties to previous office holders. Takaichi comes from far humbler roots. Layer on her candid communication approach, her groundbreaking status as the first woman to lead the party, and the portrait emerges of someone who feels refreshingly new despite decades of involvement. Whether she deliberately shaped this image or not, the result has been brilliantly effective. Of course, public persona carries enormous influence, but Takaichi's landslide also rested on her substantive policy vision, particularly an economic platform infused with clear populist instincts. Her economic outlook has occasionally clashed with market sentiment in dramatic fashion. Pledges to fast-track reductions in sales tax on food staples, for example, sent bond yields climbing to levels once considered unthinkable, spotlighting deeper anxieties over how Japan intends to finance stepped-up defense outlays and other spending priorities. The economy sits at the forefront of public concern for good reason. Japan has known sluggish growth for decades, but recent years have brought sharper hardships. One telling statistic captures the strain. Real wages have eroded for 11 straight months, while prices for everyday essentials like rice have roughly doubled. Against this backdrop, Takaichi has offered voters an enticing package, promising lower taxes, expanded aid programs, heavier investment in research and development plus infrastructure, and defense spending above 2% of GDP, all without corresponding tax increases or added government borrowing. It is the kind of message that resonates deeply with ordinary citizens. The catch, however, is painfully obvious. The math simply does not balance, and financial markets have taken notice. Observers have begun comparing this self-described Japanese Margaret Thatcher to Britain's ill-fated Liz Truss, whose brief 44-day tenure collapsed under the weight of a similar spend-heavy, revenue-light fiscal experiment that spooked investors. Takaichi's signature proposal to suspend value-added tax on basic goods and food for at least 2 years carries an estimated $30 billion price tag, roughly equal to 2 full years of corporate tax collections, or more than half the planned record defense budget for 2026. Even ambitious initiatives like the hybrid drone shield system for coastal protection pale in comparison to this scale of stimulus. Markets have reacted accordingly. with the yen weakening on fears that the Bank of Japan might be forced into aggressive monetary expansion, reminiscent of fiscal overreach seen in other economies. Japan already shoulders one of the world's heaviest debt loads, approaching 250% of GDP. For years, this burden felt sustainable thanks to ultra-low interest rates, high domestic ownership, and substantial central bank holdings that made the debt feel almost internal. Those conditions, however, are evolving. Just one day after Takaichi called the snap election in January, yields on 40-year bonds spiked to historic highs above 4%, delivering a clear warning shot even if rates later moderated. Debt servicing already claims nearly a quarter of the national budget, and any sustained rise in costs could trigger a sharp escalation in obligations, regardless of central bank maneuvers. Takaichi herself appears fully aware of these fiscal limits, as her post-election statements have stressed the need for sustainable budgeting and measured tax adjustments. Her own party harbors significant skepticism toward many of the bolder spending ideas, which partly accounts for the stark contrast between her sky-high personal ratings and the LDP's more modest ones. It is rather like voters preferring the encouraging teacher who hands out high marks over the demanding one who enforces real standards. Now that she holds a commanding mandate, the central tension becomes whether she will deliver on those campaign commitments or whether the party's fiscal conservatives will pull her back toward restraint. Early signals point toward the latter outcome. The once prominent VAT suspension idea has quietly receded from discussion, and markets have so far absorbed her victory without panic. Behind her primary success also stands a pivotal insider, Taro Aso, who has assumed the vice presidency after tipping the scales in her favor, and who is renowned for his hawkish stance on deficits, having previously steered Abe toward meaningful fiscal improvement. The real test ahead, therefore, is not whether deficits balloon, but how Takaichi's popularity endures if many economic pledges go unfulfilled, because that endurance will ultimately decide whether the LDP can finally realize its decades-old constitutional reform dream. It is commonly suggested that the supermajority now gives Takaichi a clear runway to revise the famous Article 9, yet nothing could be further from reality. Altering Japan's constitution has proven virtually impossible over nearly 8 decades, and there are structural reasons it has never happened. The process demands 2/3 majorities in both the lower and upper houses, followed by a national referendum. While the referendum might succeed, provided no catastrophic errors occur and the lower house threshold is already secured, the upper house remains the stubborn barrier. That chamber renews half its members every 3 years, and the most recent elections took place shortly before Takaichi's ascent, when the LDP lost 13 of its 114 seats. Reaching 2/3 would require 166 votes, turning the arithmetic into a delicate balancing act. Coalition partners holding 19 seats back reform, as do the 15 members of the far-right Sanzito and various smaller conservative outfits, though each brings its own nuances. Even together, they fall short without support from 1 or 2 larger parties. The DPFP offers ideological overlap, but remains internally divided on constitutional change and maintains strained relations with the LDP. Then there is Komeito, the Buddhist-backed party that recently severed its 26-year partnership with the LDP over the very corruption scandals discussed earlier. While not inherently opposed to reform, it leans more pacifist and conciliatory toward China. The recent rupture has proven costly for Komeito, evident in its weak showing alongside the main opposition, raising the possibility of a future reconciliation with the dominant force. Takaichi, who once divorced and later remarried her husband, might yet engineer a similar political homecoming if she preserves her personal popularity. This dynamic explains why economic outcomes matter so profoundly for the LDP's long-term hopes. The party must regain former allies quickly, especially with potential escalation of Chinese pressure on Taiwan looming around 2027, merely a year before the next upper house vote, in which half the seats from a stronger LDP era will again be contested. In other words, even solid results may not grant full autonomy from coalition dependencies. In essence, the Prime Minister confronts a complex and high-stakes environment. Her sweeping victory owes much to the populist flavor of her economic platform, yet whether she pursues those promises aggressively or scales them back, both paths carry substantial risks. Fortunately, she holds one powerful card that can elevate her standing irrespective of short-term economic headwinds, and she has already played it to strong effect. That card is a firm stance toward China. Public support for her position has held steady even as tensions simmer, with polls showing a clear majority in agreement. Weeks ago, she ignited a notable diplomatic exchange by stating unequivocally that Japan would defend Taiwan in the event of invasion, a bluntness unprecedented for a Japanese leader, and surprising even against the backdrop of existing military preparations permitted under the current constitution. Though Beijing responded with temporary measures like reduced flights, the episode ultimately appeared to galvanize domestic unity around a shared external challenge, much as external threats have bolstered other leaders facing domestic difficulties. Takaichi is hardly a one-dimensional hawk. She has been photographed warmly with Xi Jinping and has worked to strengthen ties, especially with South Korea, as the K-pop collaboration vividly illustrates. Her earlier emphasis on Japan moving beyond historical apologies has been tempered by pragmatic diplomacy. Sanae Takaichi, rather than her party alone, has secured a truly historic mandate that edges the door open toward constitutional change after decades of frustration. Yet the absence of immediate political obstacles does not erase other constraints, particularly economic ones. So far, she has only needed to offer promises. The true test will arrive when those promises meet the hard test of delivery and whether her remarkable popularity can weather the inevitable trade-offs. In the end, Takaichi's ascent invites us to reflect on a deeper truth. In turbulent times, the fusion of bold personal leadership and shrewd political instincts can rewrite the rules of the game. Yet the ultimate test lies in navigating the quiet, unforgiving realities of governance that no election victory can fully erase. What choices will Japan make under her watch, and how might they ripple across an increasingly tense region? The answers may define not only her legacy, but the future shape of Asia itself.